Hey again. I wanted to make a small follow-up video to the one I did on monsters and mythology, that I didn't include in my other video. I remember years ago I used to argue with my brother about what monsters were the scariest. I was a big fan of the Japanese kaiju monsters like Godzilla, or as he's known more accurately, Gojira and Ghidorah and others. And my brother was a big fan of the human-sized monsters, werewolf, wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula, vampires. And I remember we asked somebody what monsters were scarier, and he agreed with my brother. He felt that the human monsters were scarier. And looking back, I think he might be right. I mean, there's just something about human sized monsters that are, they're human, but they're not human. It's like something went wrong. Humans are not supposed to act that way, and I think maybe those monsters are scarier. Plus, they're human sized. They could hide and sneak up on you. And, hey, don't get me wrong. If you saw Godzilla walking down the street, you'd crap yourself like I would, But there is something scary about the human sized monsters. I remember, in that previous video I just did, I talked about the Australian dog-faced man, and I remember a myth involving him that really kind of chilled me a little bit. Nobody saw him, but then one day there was a huge drought throughout Australia, and everybody didn't have any water except for this one place that everybody gathered to drink water, and they see this creature coming up, a body of a human and the head of a dog, and they thought, "Oh, there he is," and they ran away. And he drank too much water because if you've been without water for a long time, you're not supposed to drink too much of it at once. And he drinks it. He drinks too much of it, and he vomits. And they could see among the vomit the human remains from people he ate. And then he says to them, "Oh, now that you've all seen me, I'm going to kill you all, but not now, later." And he disappears. So the people set a trap. They set a very clever trap that eventually killed not only him, but his pack of dogs and his ugly wife as well. It kind of reminds me also of stories of people with dogs' heads. Not all of them are necessarily monsters. There are writings that there are strange lands where people didn't look like people. They had the heads of dogs. It's called kynocephaly. Kyno, dog, cephaly, head. So kynocephaly, these people who had dogs' heads. And there's even one saint that there's a legend that he had the head of a dog. His name was Saint Christopher. Saint Christopher was believed to have the head of a dog. And he was so strong, and he used his strength to defend the faith. But then other people said to him, "Hey, that's not fair. You represent Christianity. Don't you want to be a martyr too?" And he says, "Hey, you're right." So he lets himself get killed eventually, and he becomes a martyr. Moving on to something about vampires. I have a book on vampires that I read years ago. It's this book here. I'll have it in the description below. Vampires, Burial, and Death. And it's about vampire myths and a little bit on werewolves too. And it's very interesting because he talks about how the way vampires are depicted in movies is it's kind of funny. They tend to be aristocratic and very pale. And he says the vampires that go back to village belief are actually very different. He's probably, if a vampire showed up at your door, he's probably wearing some sort of burial shroud, and he's probably ruddy in the face, reddish by drinking blood. And a lot of this evolved from people not understanding the decomposition process. If you died and were buried, people thought you decomposed rapidly. But depending on various conditions, you don't always decompose so rapidly. Sometimes you look pretty intact. They would notice that it looked like your nails were growing, and that's because when you're dead, the skin recedes and it looks like your nails are growing. So they would think you were alive and your nails were growing. Another thing that would happen is something called skin slippage, where your skin would fall off you and underneath look like there was new skin. So they would think you're shedding your skin because you're alive. And sometimes if they stab the corpse, blood would gush out. But that's only, again, part of the slow decomposition process, where these are fluids that are just, making you bloat, but they thought it was from drinking blood. So also, if you weren't buried correctly, animals would dig you up, and they thought, oh, see, he's coming out of his grave, So they would think you're a vampire. It was believed that the reason why you would become a vampire is that if you were really evil in life, your body would be inhabited by some evil spirit, and you would rise from the dead. Getting back to one thing about werewolves is interesting, is that in a few books, including that book I mentioned, and another book about, it was a study of witch beliefs, is that there's actually, even though werewolves are actually kind of seen as monsters, there's actually a strain of belief where werewolves actually are defenders of people. They're actually seen as enemies of the vampires. I believe that was explored in Underworld, that movie, which I never saw, the battle between werewolves and vampires. Well, actually, that is kind of believed in some ancient, very old belief systems, that the vampire is actually the enemy. I mean, the werewolf is actually the enemy of the vampire. That's something that's actually derived from some very old belief systems. And of course, werewolves are very prominent in the beliefs of Scandinavia. It was believed that you wouldn't actually transform into a werewolf. It was believed that if you put on the skin of a wolf, you would be a wolf, essentially. And unlike movies where werewolves or wolfmen, whatever, they walk upright, but they have a face that's furry. Usually werewolves of myth and legend, they tend to just look like wolves. Big, scary wolves, but wolves nonetheless. But not like standing upright like a human with the face of wolf-like characteristics or something like that. So that's it. That's just a few more comments I have on monsters. And until next time, thanks for listening.